Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to teach you how to sew a button. Otherwise, how to save a ton of money on something you can easily do yourself at home. I want to start out by talking about who even needs to know this skill. I know what you're thinking. I'm not a grandma. I don't need to know how to sew. But nowadays, that's really not true. If you've ever worn anything that has a button, chances are you need to know how to sew, even just the basics. Some of these can range from a nice dress shirt that you wear under your suit, the button on your suit jacket, to even that cozy flannel you wear when you're out working on the farm. So now that you know that this does apply to you and you do need to know how to sew, let's really talk about why we need to do this. So I did a little bit of an internet search, and the prices that come up for what someone is going to cost you simply to resew on a button, which you'll see later on does not take much time, is going to cost you anywhere from 50 cents to $2 a button. You're going to need to get started are going to be clearly the clothing item that you want to fix, a button that matches. The buttons included in a sewing kit are usually pretty generic, a needle, thread, scissors, and a needle threader if desired. Just a heads up, oftentimes the scissors that come in a sewing kit aren't quite as sharp as you might like them to be, so don't be afraid to pull a pair of your favorite scissors out of your drawer at home. So before we get started, let's go ahead and watch a version of me sewing on a button, incredibly sped up. This is just going to kind of give you an idea of all the steps that we're going to learn in a moment. What you're going to see here is that I like to double up the thread so that it is being pulled through and doubly supported. I'm now finding the perfect spot on the shirt to go ahead and sew on that button, placing the button on the shirt and pushing my needle through the back side. I'm going to continue going through the holes opposite back and forth like we'll talk about in a little bit later. I am tying the knot at the back of the shirt so that we can go ahead and finish off this button. I usually tie it twice, but you're welcome to do it more. Snipping the extra thread close to the knot, going ahead and making sure that it all fits through the button perfectly, and there you go. Threading the needle is going to be the first step of sewing on your button. I have pictured here how to do it with both the needle threader that I talked about and just on your own. So the goal is to take the thread and stick it through the eye of the needle. If you choose to use the needle threader, that's also a really cool technology that is super helpful. You'll take the wire ends of the needle threader and stick it through the hole of the needle. A bit more stiff so it goes in easier. Putting the thread then through that larger hole so that both sides are hanging out. Both edges have a firm grip. If you pull it through, it'll pull both edges of the thread through. You'll then make sure that one will essentially be tugged back out so that you can tie a knot holding the needle from that string, which is when we get to tying the knot. I usually like to double up my thread before I tie the knot, just because it makes it easier to keep track of all the thread. Let's talk a little bit about what you might see when you look at a button. There are basically two types of buttons that you're going to face if you're trying to sew a button on a jacket. The first button you might encounter is going to have two holes. With that, you'll be only using those two holes, threading back and forth. If you come across a button that has four holes, you're simply going to cross the thread, make use of the two holes directly diagonal from each other before switching directions. I'll show you this on the next slide, but think about this in quadrants. So you'll sew in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 before completing and sewing, and then in quadrant 2 to quadrant 4. When you're ready to finally sew and you've gotten to know that button very intimately, you're going to take a look at where to get the sewing done. So usually the easiest way to do this is to line up the buttonhole over that missing part of the button, like you see pictured on the slide. Sometimes you'll be able to see the remnants of where that button has been sewn on by the store, and that's a great place to lay your button. Otherwise, just make sure that it's laying directly under the buttonhole so that when you're all said and done, the shirt will be able to button. Then you go ahead and place it on this item. For the ease of this demonstration, I placed an X there, just so we can keep in mind that that's where we're going to be holding it. If you're doing this on a shirt, please don't draw on it. Finally get started sewing. I know, we're finally to this step. You're going to take the edge of the needle through the back side of the fabric. This is going to be the side of the shirt that would be touching the skin usually. Pushing that needle through the back side into one of the holes so that it's coming out of the top hole and that knot is holding it on the opposite side of the fabric. You're going to follow through with this, going into the whole diagonal from it like we talked about previously, and then continue this pattern. Oftentimes I find it easiest to look where you've recently gone through the material by lining up straight with that thread. As you can see, I did in this one. The needle is right behind the knot, and you're going to follow this process for some time. Now, like I talked about, if you have a button that's got 4 holes rather than 2, you're going to go ahead and once you get a good amount of thread on there, something that seems pretty sturdy, switch directions and sew over that. At this point, if you had a hole with only 2 buttons, you'd be done. So to switch directions, this is where you have to play a little bit of a guessing game as to where you're going to poke through. But you're dealing with such a small area, think of the needle as extension of your hand and you'll know where to sew. Also, don't be afraid, don't stick the needle all the way through. Just kind of fish a little bit, see where it's at and if it lines up with the button. After finishing these steps, you can go ahead and tie off the knot. Now sometimes it looks messy on the end, like this inside one that I have shown. Don't worry about that, no one can see it. And especially if it's your first time, it's going to be messy. So the best way to tie it off is to stick your needle through that lump of thread that we've been using to tie. And then simply, as you pull it through, catch it and make a knot with it. I usually do this twice just to make sure it's nice and secure, but if you want to do it 3 or 4 times, that's absolutely fine. Finally, we're going to finish off by cutting as close to the knot as you can without actually cutting the knot, and then you have a complete button. Go ahead. Alright all, so I'm happy to admit that you have successfully on your own sewn a button onto your new piece of clothing. If you have any questions, feel free to go back, pause the videos at any parts that are a little bit challenging for you, but you have successfully succeeded, and I'm very proud of each and every one of you. Thanks for watching.